Then he said softly, "I'm listening." Between a primary school classroom in the outskirts of Durango, Emilia stood before a small wooden podium, her hands placed neatly on the edge of the table. Behind her was a chalkboard written in white chalk with the words, "Dia de la Familia, tell about the hero in your life." The pink water bottle was placed neatly next to the photo of Beatrice, a rare moment when Beatrice laughed loudly, her hair ruffled in the mountain wind, one hand holding the tiny Emilia. The two seemed to stop in the middle of a world only for each other. "My hero." Emilia looked up, her eyes calm but deep. "Is my dad. Not because he's strong or fast, but because he never gave up believing that he had lost his child." Not far away, at the main office of the organization, El Camino del Padre, located on the main avenue of Durango, Daniel was bowed over a new missing person file. The afternoon light streamed in through the shutters, shining on the photos of children hanging on the board, each with a question, "Who remembers this face?" On his desk was a notebook filled with calls, notes from parents, bus station, lists, license plates, all the things Daniel had learned with his own journey to find Emilia. Now they became tools to help others not have to go alone. A journalist interviewed him nearby, filming for a regional news program. "You used to be a freight worker, not a police officer, no training. What made you do what people said was impossible?" Daniel looked straight into the camera. "I don't have a gun. I don't have a badge. I only have a father's love." The afternoon came. Students left school, parents picked up their children. Emilia stayed behind last she sat on the steps, looking up at the sky, holding the water bottle as if holding a part of her mother that remained. Daniel came to pick her up, his walk slightly stooped, his hair grayer than before. In the summer of 1997, beneath a sky so blue it seemed painted, Beatriz Castillo bent down to tie Emilia's shoelaces, her young daughter. Her voice was gentle but firm. "It's been so long since we've had a trip together like this. Let's make the most of it." She smiled, and Emilia smiled back, her eyes sparkling in the sunlight, completely unaware that 3 days later her mother would be dead and she herself would vanish without a trace into the dense forest. Beatrice had chosen the Sierra Madre Occidental mountains as their destination. It was pristine land where thick pine canopies cast shadows onto the moss-covered ground. She told her best friend Marisol that she needed to hear herself, a statement that made Marisol laugh, swirling her wine glass dismissively. But Beatrice didn't laugh. She had been divorced for over a year, raising Emilia alone, and she understood the silence of the forest was necessary, not just for her, but for her daughter. On the morning of their departure, the small kitchen buzzed like a miniature family celebration. Beatrice bustled about, sealing the lid on a still warm cornbread container, reminding Emilia to double-check all her essentials. Emilia, meanwhile, was skipping around her cat-printed backpack, never letting go of her pink water bottle with a fox on it. "I'm going to sleep with this," she declared, clutching it like treasure. Beatrice laughed, reaching out to gently pinch her daughter's nose. "All right, but don't spill the magic potion in your dreams, okay?" Marisol chose a short dress and jean jacket for the forest trip, while Carlos lit a cigarette before lugging the ice chest into the car. The four of them set off a little after 9 in the morning with lively music from the radio and an atmosphere of excitement spreading throughout the car. Along the way, Beatrice chatted animatedly with Marisol about their childhood camping trips. occasionally turning around to adjust Emilia's hair or point out mountain peaks through the window. She was no longer as reserved as before. It seemed that nature was opening her up, and Emilia's joy was what made Beatrice shine brightest. Their 3-day adventure had begun. They set up camp near a crystal-clear stream. On the first afternoon, Beatrice and Emilia went to pick wild berries, while Marisol took a nap in a hammock and Carlos went fishing. In the evening, they grilled cornbread and sausages and made hot cocoa. Carlos told ghost stories, Marisol cracked jokes, and Beatrice held Emilia close, laughing, until her eyes watered when the little girl got so scared she crawled into her sleeping bag early. On the second day, the group climbed to the top of a short hill where they could see the entire valley of green forest below. Emilia spread her arms like a bird, while Beatrice took out her film camera to capture every moment. The last photo was of all 4 of them smiling radiantly in front of a tree. Beatrice holding her daughter, her hair fluttering gently in the mountain breeze. On the third day, they walked along a trail beside the stream. Beatrice told Emilia for the first time about how she had gotten lost in the forest as a child, and how her grandfather had found her using a tin whistle. She said, "If anything happens, just shout. Mom will hear you, no matter where you are." That was the last day Emilia saw her mother smile. Daniel woke up at 6:30 on the 4th day. The dim sunlight filtering through the curtains wasn't enough to dispel the heavy feeling in his chest. The first thing he did, as he had done the 3 previous mornings, was check his phone. No messages, no missed calls. He scrolled through his conversation history with Beatrice. The last time they had texted was on Friday evening. She had simply said, "Going tomorrow morning, just 3 days. We'll probably call back Monday night." The statement wasn't unusual, but now it was past Tuesday morning. That meant it was the 4th day. Not a word. Daniel sat silently for a moment, leaning back in his kitchen chair. He remembered clearly in previous trips, even when camping deep in the forest, Beatrice would try to find a spot with signal to call home and let him talk to their daughter for a few minutes. "She longs to hear her father's voice," she had said. Emilia also never forgot. The child had an extraordinary memory for every small detail, every promise. And now, 3 days. Not a signal. Not a trace. Daniel threw on a jacket, shoving his wallet and car keys into his pockets. On the kitchen table, he left a note, not for anyone, just an old habit from when he still lived with Beatrice. He wrote, "I'm going to find my daughter." The local police station on the outskirts of Chihuahua had only 3 officers on duty. When Daniel walked in, his jacket still dusty from the road, his voice hoarse, he said, "My ex-wife took my daughter camping with her cousin and her husband. It's been 4 days. They were supposed to be back yesterday." The young officer reached out and tapped the table, asking, "Do you have the coordinates?" Daniel shook his head. "I only know they were going to Sierra Madre near the Encantado Valley. It could be a temporary loss of signal. Don't worry too much." Daniel suppressed a sigh. He didn't say it, but a cold feeling was rising in his heart. It wasn't because they were late. It was because Beatrice never broke a promise. Never. He looked down at his phone again, the screen blank. Then he pulled out a picture of Emilia smiling, holding her pink water bottle taken last year during a hike with him. He placed the photo on the police officer's desk. "Please," Daniel said, his voice soft but firm. "I need to find my daughter." The air in the Sierra Madre forest that morning seemed thicker, oppressively so. The forest rangers received a distress signal from a tourist radio at around 5:40 am, an intermittent signal repeating a strange sequence of sounds, as if someone had accidentally bumped the play button and then left it midway. A team of 3 immediately entered the forest along the trail leading to Encantado Station, where Beatrice's group had registered for 3 days before. It took them nearly an hour to get through the muddy slope caused by the downpour the night before. Near the dangerous bend to the south, one of them spotted tire tracks imprinted in the mud skidding sharply to the right, then abruptly disappearing at the edge of a cliff. "There's something here," the head ranger whispered, looking down. Below, a car lay overturned at the bottom of the ravine, nestled among the thick trees. The roof was crushed, the windshield shattered, and one of the rear doors had come completely off, hanging precariously as if about to fall into the stream below. When they reached the scene, the sight before them made the youngest member of the team turn away. Beatrice lay about 10 meters from the car, on a rocky outcrop of body, contorted unnaturally, her head having suffered a severe impact, dried blood dark around her hair and the collar of her red jacket. There were no signs of life. Carlos was found in the driver's seat, his body slumped over the shattered steering wheel. His pulse was weak, and a deep wound on his forehead was still bleeding. In the passenger seat, Marisol was unconscious. One side of her forehead bruised, her hand gripping the edge of the door as if trying to escape when the car lost control. But what made the head ranger frown wasn't the scene itself, but the absence of someone. There was no sign of any child. "There was a child with them," he said, his eyes scanning the area. "A girl around 10 years old. She's not here." 3 days later, during the expansion of the search area for Emilia, the rescue team discovered an unexpected object, the little girl's pink thermos, thrown into a crevice about 800 meters from the accident scene. There were no children's footprints around it, no depressions, no broken branches, no any indication that Emilia had ever been there. Only the bottle clean dry with a little mud on the lid, as if someone had carefully placed it down. A rescue expert whispered, "Children never go that far without leaving a trace." The police concluded accident. No evidence of criminal activity. Beatrice may have chased after her daughter, slipped and fallen. Emilia panicked, wandered off into the forest, her whereabouts unknown. The case was temporarily closed. Beatrice's family was not satisfied. The most vehement reaction came from Daniel, her ex-husband. He couldn't accept it. He received a call from the police that afternoon, his hands still shaking as he signed the autopsy report. Before him was the pink water bottle. The police said, "We think this belongs to your daughter, found quite far from the scene." Daniel said nothing. He just stared at it, the color faded by the sun, but the small inscription on the side was still there. "Emilia's from Mom." His hand clenched. "A child can run," he whispered. "But Beatrice, she would never let her run alone." 10 days after burying Beatrice at the foot of a pine-covered hill where Emilia had once picked wildflowers to put in her mother's hair, Daniel returned to the town of Creel. In his hand was an old, crumpled photo, Beatrice sitting on stone steps holding Emilia in her arms. In the little girl's hand, still the pink thermos that the police had returned. Daniel didn't say much, just nodded a greeting to each person, then held out the photo. His question was always the same. "Have you ever seen them before the accident happened?" No one answered immediately. Some shook their heads. Some looked at him with pity. But on the fourth afternoon in a small cafe called Callejón del Norte, the innkeeper Luis looked closely at the photo, then frowned. "Someone asked about this child," he said, his finger tapping the image of Emilia. "About 2 weeks ago, a tall, dark-haired man with a plump woman. I remember because she called the child Niña Rebelde. They asked if anyone had seen a child sneaking onto freight trains." Daniel squeezed the photo in his hand. "Where were they going?" Luis shook his head, pouring more coffee into a chipped cup. The smell of burnt roasted beans wafted through the old wooden kitchen. "No, they didn't say anything," he said, his eyes not leaving the table. "But I heard them asking for directions to the highway towards Sonora. The man was driving, the woman in the back kept looking around as if afraid someone was following." Daniel tightened the strap of his backpack on the seat beside him. His throat was dry, but Luis's words were like a bucket of cold water thrown over his tired body. He stood up, zipping up his jacket. "Thank you, sir." "No need to thank me," Luis said, still not looking up. "I also have a granddaughter about your daughter's age. If I lost her, I'd probably go crazy and tear up the whole region like you." Daniel nodded, stepping out of the inn. Outside, the early winter wind rustled through the tin roofs. He pulled up his collar, looking west where the highway faded into the mountain mist. Whether it was Sonora or even further, he would find her, because parents aren't born to give up, but to go to the very end until they hear their child call back. Daniel decided to sell his house, quit his engineering job in Monterrey, take all the money he had left and rent a small room behind the Creole Central Market. He lived by loading and unloading goods for the train station where people came and went without paying attention to anyone. But because of that, every change became clear if one was persistent enough. At night, he posted flyers in front of schools, post offices, bars where Carlos used to frequent, a picture of Emilia with the words, "If anyone has seen my child, please contact me at this phone number." At the bottom was the phone number and a small note, "Pink water bottle with a fox." He taught himself how to print photos from an old Polaroid camera, figuring out how to adjust the ink and printing paper from a local camera repair shop. Each print made his hand shake, but he never stopped persisting. Late that afternoon, Daniel walked along the central park of the town, holding a stack of flyers that were smudged at the corners with sweat. He had pasted them all over the crowded spots, but the park near the market was the last place he hadn't visited, the gathering place for street vendors and children working to help their families. He stopped in front of a small cart with a red canvas roof where an 11-year-old girl was arranging bags of pastries on a tray. She wore a frayed straw hat, her hair tied with a faded red ribbon. Daniel bent down, holding out a flyer. "Have you seen this girl? This is my daughter. She's been missing for almost a year." The girl looked up, looking at the photo for a few seconds. Her eyes blinked quickly, then suddenly stopped. Her hand trembled slightly as she put down a bag of pastries. "Sir, this friend," her voice was almost a whisper, "I think I've seen her last week in a silver truck, very big. It had Sonora license plates, and there was a picture of a blue snake stuck on the back of the truck." Daniel knelt down to her level, not taking his eyes off her. "Are you sure? Did you see anyone with her?" The girl hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, I'm sure. There was a dark-haired man driving the car, with a fat woman in the back seat. She kept holding that little girl tight, like she was afraid she'd run away." Daniel felt the ground beneath his feet slip away. But the girl's eyes, clear and certain, kept him steady. "Thank you," he said softly, and when he stood up, his hand trembling slightly on the stack of flyers, Daniel knew the road ahead would be longer. But now at least he had a direction, and a glimmer of hope for the first time in many dark months. The next day, Daniel walked into a small stationery shop near the square and bought a large map, the kind used by long-haul drivers, with each highway and border town numbered and densely marked. Back in his room, he pushed the table to one side, spreading the map out to occupy the entire blank wall behind his bed. The dim yellow light bulb shone on the boundary lines, which ran like blood vessels across the name that he could no longer read, normally Chihuahua, Sonora. His hand trembled slightly as he picked up the red pen. He began to circle the places he had read about in the news cases of missing children in the past 10 years. Each circle was an incomplete story: a child who went to buy bread and never returned, a little girl lost at a festival who was never found. When the third circle appeared, he stopped. All three were located near Highway 16, a major transport route where truck convoys often stopped to rest, refuel, and then disappear into the night. Daniel stepped back, looking at the wall. It was no longer random. It was no longer vague hope. Each red mark, each road began to form a clear image. There was a network, there was a road, and there was a hand that had taken Emilia out of his arms through this very axis. He wrote in the middle of the map a single line in bold black ink: "Emilia is still out there." Daniel stood silently before the wall, his eyes fixed on the red circles like a priest silently guarding the altar in the middle of a cathedral. In the cold room, the only warmth was the old desk under the yellow lamp. Right in the center of the table, Emilia's pink thermos lay there, a small object making no sound but the loudest echo of undiminished faith. Every night before going to bed, Daniel took a soft cloth and wiped the bottle, each small circle, each plastic lid. Not because of dust, but as if he were wiping blood from an unfinished oath. The act became a ritual no different from a prayer with bare hands. He never forgot. This was the last thing that was found. 800 meters from the scene. No footprints, no cries. Just the small bottle lying alone among the dry leaves and sharp stones, as if placed down deliberately. During the day, Daniel still worked like the other men, loading goods onto trucks, transferring food boxes from the train to the market. But when the sun set, he quietly transformed into someone else, the person the police began to call the library ghost. At night, he rummaged through public records, learning how to use the old fax machine at the post office, asking the night watchman to help print documents. He bought old newspapers from the bookstore by the station, noting every disappearance that had occurred in the past 10 years, marking them on the map, the red circles connected like a chain of blood. Once, while rereading Beatrice's file for the countless time, Daniel suddenly stopped. The medical report clearly stated Carlos fell into a deep coma on the very day the file was officially closed. From the time of the accident to the confirmation of closing the file, only 3 days, coinciding perfectly with the time Carlos was unable to provide testimony. All assumptions were built on Marisol's account. That never sat well with him. A week later, when Daniel opened the wooden mailbox in the hallway of the boarding house, he saw an old envelope with no printed ink, no sender listed except for a short name, Claudia Navarro. The paper was yellowed, the folded edges slightly torn as if it had passed through many hands. The content wasn't long, but it made his hand clench the paper until it was wrinkled. I lost my son when he was 9. The case was closed after 5 days. No footprints, no screams, just a hat left by a dry well. I read your flyer at the train station. If you don't mind listening, I'm willing to share what I know. 3 days later, Daniel was in a quiet suburb on the edge of Agua Prieta. Claudia's house was a classic terracotta brick house with a purple bougainvillea vine stretching over the grey tin roof. The door opened before he could knock a second time. Claudia stood there, a woman in her late 50s, her hair simply styled, her eyes shadowed, not from lack of sleep, but from memories that wouldn't let go. "Are you Daniel?" she asked, her voice hoarse but firm. He nodded, holding out his hand. She didn't shake it, but she didn't turn away either. She just said briefly, "Come inside. I'll give you what I know." In the simple living room, the walls were hung with old photos, but only one child appeared many times, a boy, smiling brightly, wearing a fabric hat with a brim. On the table was a glass of water, placed next to the actual hat, faded old, but kept like a sacred object. His name was Ismael. Claudia began, her voice steady, as if she had told this story in her head 1,000 times without ever saying it out loud. Daniel didn't interrupt. He just listened, taking notes not with a pen, but with his eyes. Claudia told about the last time she saw her son, about the dry well behind the village that she always forbade him to play near, about how no one in the village heard any cries, but also no one saw a stranger appear. The police came, did a cursory examination, and concluded that it was an accident. He probably fell into the well and the body drifted underground through the cracks in the rock. "But I know," Claudia said, her eyes not leaving the hat. "I'm a mother. I know. My son didn't disappear on his own." Daniel sat there for a long time, not just to hear the story, but to let Claudia feel that finally someone believed her. From Claudia, he connected with 3 other families. Each person lost their child in different circumstances, but the scenes were eerily similar. No children's footprints around, no signs of a struggle, and always a grown-up, unconscious, panicked, or not remembering what happened. One night, while he was pasting more files onto the now full wall, the fax machine made an unusual whirring sound. Daniel slowly walked over, filled with a strange feeling, as if something had been waiting for him for a long time and was now knocking. A thin sheet of paper rolled out of the machine, the handwriting scrawled in blue ink. "Do you have a daughter named Emilia? I work at the Tucson bus station. I saw a girl like that, dark hair, thin, with a woman with a large birthmark on her cheek. The child was holding a pink water bottle." Daniel slumped into a chair. His hand dropped the cleaning cloth, his eyes not leaving the words on the fax. The bottle, again the bottle. The blurred black and white photo was printed from a Tucson station camera. A blurry image taken from a high angle in the middle of a crowd of people coming and going. But Daniel didn't need a clear face. He immediately recognized the pink thermos in the little girl's hand, the color no longer clear, but the shape, the curve of the handle. The slanted screw cap was unmistakable. Daniel sat silently looking at the blurry image printed from the Greyhound bus station camera. The child in the picture hair, messed up, holding a pink water bottle, stood next to a man wearing a baseball cap, his face obscured by the shadow of the lamp. The little girl's hand was gripping his shirt, her eyes looking off to the side of the lens, strangely lost. He squeezed the paper lightly, his eyes not leaving the shape of that child. Every detail, the bottle, the age, the demeanor suggested only one name in his heart. But reason still took a step back, hesitant. He mumbled, almost asking himself, If that's really her, then this is worse than I ever thought. Outside, the traffic was still noisy. But in Daniel's head, there was only the voice of Beatrice, the fragmented words from the last phone call. Carlos said he wanted to take care of Emilia. He breathed heavily, hoarsely. It wasn't just an accident. It couldn't have been. Then, as if closing an old door in his heart, Daniel said slowly, word by word, no longer shaking, If it's her, then Carlos didn't just betray, but he sold her like an item. And Marisol, she knew, she wasn't there by accident. Not an accusation, but a conclusion pushed out from a heart worn down by every detail, every look, every space that no one else could see. And that was when Daniel understood the search for his daughter had turned into a fight to reclaim the truth. At the Tucson police headquarters, Daniel walked in like a man carrying the entire Sierra Madre mountains on his back. 6 months of tracking every detail and 6 months of wondering if anyone in the world would stop to listen. The meeting room was cold, and facing him were 3 people, 2 local police officers and a female FBI liaison named Moore. They didn't seem hostile, but they were clearly not used to a father from Mexico suddenly pushing open the door carrying a stack of papers and an unflinching gaze. Daniel didn't sit down right away. He stood, opened his backpack, taking out each item with both hands. Old photos of Beatrice holding Emilia in front of the tent, copies of birth certificates with the seal of the small Chihuahua County, and then a crumpled letter, the edges of the paper turned handwritten letter from Claudia Navarro. "I'm not a police officer," Daniel said, his voice slightly hoarse. "But I know enough that my daughter is being taken away like a commodity." He pushed the photo from the Greyhound bus station camera towards them. "This is a photo taken from the station's staff. The child in the photo is holding a pink bottle." Moore frowned slightly. One of the police officers leaned in to look closer. The room fell into a few seconds of silence. "You don't have to believe me right away," Daniel said now, sitting down, his hands clasped tightly together. "But please, run DNA, search the database, check the cameras, do everything you can. If it's not my daughter, I'll back off. But if it is, then there's at least one child who needs to be saved right now." There was a moment when his eyes met the FBI agent. Moore didn't say anything, just nodded very lightly. The Tucson police chief, after a closed-door meeting, decided to forward the case to the federal level. 3 days later, FBI agent Ruiz appeared. Ruiz, a man with salt and pepper hair, a stern face, entered the interrogation room with a closed-off demeanor. He didn't smile, just silently flipped through each document Daniel presented. "Who are you in this case?" he asked, his voice emotionless. "The girl's father," Daniel replied, "and the only one who believes she's still alive." For 2 weeks since the first meeting in Tucson, Daniel lived between 2 worlds. One was where he had knelt before the child selling pastries in the park. The other was the cold administrative hallway, where every office door was locked with procedure and suspicion. Ruiz did his best, but something wasn't right. Each time the file was sent to request a search warrant for an address related to the truck. The warrant was delayed. One time, surveillance camera footage was lost due to data storage errors. One-time license plate information was requested from the State Transportation Agency, and, coincidentally, the inspection system had a network error for 3 days in a row. Daniel wasn't an investigator, but he had a clear feeling someone was hindering the process from somewhere in the system. One afternoon, around 5 o'clock, Daniel was staying at the FBI headquarters with a young investigator named Carla who had been quietly helping him check the truck license plate data for weeks. She found something strange. A silver truck with Sonora license plates had stopped at a small gas station near the town of Patagonia just 3 hours after the time the Tucson station camera recorded the image of the child holding the water bottle. That gas station did not have a long-term camera storage system, but luckily, a nearby car accessory store had a security camera facing the parking lot. Carla quickly called to ask the shop owner to keep the recording of that day. He agreed and made it clear, "You have to come get it within 24 hours, I don't have a big drive." Ruiz signed an internal memo requesting a car to pick up the film a simple step, but the news that came the next morning left Daniel stunned. "The car isn't authorized to leave headquarters," the duty officer reported. "The reason is unclear. It seems there was an order from a superior in the state traffic police. The order has been cancelled." Ruiz turned purple with anger. He called the dispatch center directly, but kept getting transferred. When Daniel asked for permission to go get the tape himself, Carla just shook her head, whispering, "It's too late. They just overwrote the data this morning because there was a robbery nearby." That time, Daniel said nothing. He sat alone on a bench outside the hallway, staring at the printed photo of Emilia. Not disappointed, but realizing someone was pulling his legs away from the truth. Some hand knew too well that he was getting close. And that hand wasn't far away, but right in the ranks of those who were supposed to protect justice. Ruiz began using a more secure federal channel, less dependent on the state police network. And then suddenly news came from the Border Patrol. In an abandoned warehouse near Nogales, close to the Mexican border, there were signs of child imprisonment. One of the station employees said he had seen the man in the photo taking 2 children onto a truck heading in that direction. The FBI planned a raid secretly without revealing information to too many people. Ruiz ordered Daniel to stay in the monitoring room, separated from the special command area by a wall of glass. "You're not a federal employee. Every risk is beyond your intervention." Daniel didn't argue. He just sat quietly, holding his head in his hands, his eyes glued to the live screen images from a surveillance drone flying above the warehouse area. Night fell. At exactly 2 a.m., the task force moved in. Flashlights flashed like knives cutting through the darkness. Whistles, signals, and footsteps rang out in unison on the screen. Daniel saw a door burst open, and then a few small figures ran out the children, 4 of them. One of them stopped in the middle of the road, not crying, not screaming, just looking around as if looking for someone familiar. In her hand, still the pink bottle. At the FBI station, Emilia sat in the medical room, wrapped in a thin blanket. The little girl's eyes were sunken, her hair matted, her lips cracked. But when Daniel walked in, she looked up. "Dad?" Her voice was hoarse, but her gaze still had a hint of recognition. Daniel rushed forward, kneeling down to hug his daughter, tears falling like rain on her hair. "My name is Emilia Castillo," the little girl told Ruiz. "My mum is dead. Uncle Carlos locked me up. Aunt Marisol helped him. They said they would take me across." Ruiz stopped. Daniel couldn't say anything. He just hugged his daughter tighter, as if afraid that if he let go, she would disappear again, like so many children on the wall. But while the nurse took Emilia to shower, Daniel turned to the window of the monitoring room. Emilia, in the arms of a stranger, still turned back to look outside. The little girl's eyes weren't on her father, but on the dark hallway outside where there was only a dimly flickering light bulb, as if someone was still watching. My mom was pushed. Emilia's voice was very small, almost a whisper but clear. She was sitting on a cushioned chair facing the therapist, a middle-aged woman named Mariela, with grey hair on both sides of her temples, her eyes not blinking. Between them was a box of crayons and a blank sheet of paper. Emilia didn't draw anything, just used a black pencil to draw parallel lines, broken lines. They thought I wasn't awake, she continued, her eyes still fixed on the paper. But I saw. I heard the arguing. I heard my mum scream. Mariela sat still, not interrupting. I dream about it a lot, Emilia said this time, looking at Daniel, who was sitting in the corner of the room holding his breath. Mum, falling like a dry leaf. My hands couldn't reach in time. The room was silent. That evening, Daniel stood alone on the balcony of his room, holding an old photo Beatrice holding Emilia when she was 2 years old. He recalled every detail, the hair ruffled by the wind, Beatrice's eyes looking at the little girl as if protecting the whole world. If what Emilia remembered was true, then everything the police had closed was a lie. He lit a cigarette for the first time after 3 years of quitting, then stubbed it out immediately. The decision was clear. 3 days later, he was at the city hospital where Carlos was recovering in the intensive care unit. The man who used to be Marisol's husband now lay curled up among the tubes and heart monitors. His condition was no longer life-threatening, but the doctor said his memory was blurred, his words mixed as if his brain was still suspended between 2 worlds. Daniel brought a small recording device, the kind used by journalists. He didn't ask anyone for permission. He just went in, sat down, and waited. Carlos didn't recognize him. Carlos stirred in the hospital bed, his thin hand hovering in the air as if to grasp something. His dry, cracked lips moved silently, his eyes slightly open, cloudy with drugs and time. He groaned softly, his head tilting to the right, looking towards the window, as if someone was standing outside. Cold. Too cold wind. Daniel, standing silently next to the recording device, didn't blink. The room had only the steady beeping of the heart monitor and the breath of a person who had nothing left to hold on to. Carlos groaned again, his voice completely lost. The girl. Don't run. Marisol. Where are you? Daniel took a step forward, his shadow falling on the edge of the bed. He didn't turn around. He just said in a daze, I said not to push, but she kept shaking her head, kept nagging. A silence. Then, as if someone had turned on a switch in his memory, Carlos murmured, she said, just a light push is enough, Beatrice, always stubborn, not willing to give in. Daniel squeezed his hand, his throat dry. Carlos frowned slightly as if seeing something appearing before his eyes. We didn't mean to do that. Just wanted to leave. Take the girl with us. Teach her new things. She'll get used to it. She'll forget her mother. His voice gradually faded like an evil lullaby. The recording device was still running steadily. Daniel didn't say a word. But in his eyes, the fire that had been extinguished a year ago now flared up again, no longer pain but evidence. Not vague, not doubt, but a confession from the very person who had left Beatrice under the cold mountain rocks. When he left the hospital, Daniel walked slowly. The sun was near setting, dragging his long shadow along the old stone sidewalk. In his hand was the recording device kept in his inside pocket like a blood oath. For the first time in many months, his eyes were no longer watery. They were full of determination, the kind of look that didn't wait for anyone to help anymore. He pulled out his phone, called a number that he had memorized without needing to save. "Ruiz," he said when the call connected. "I have evidence. Reopen the case." The arrest warrant for Marisol should have been signed 3 days earlier with full evidence and testimony from Emilia. But somehow the file was returned for additional details to verify identity, even though she had clearly declared her ID in the previous hospitalization. Ruiz slammed his fist on the table, but Daniel just smiled faintly, because he was used to the feeling of everything being pulled back by an invisible hand. However, by the morning of the 4th day, news came from the Border Patrol, a woman matching the description, her hair tied up, carrying a fake passport, had just been arrested while trying to cross a trail west of Nogales, where smugglers often chose to hide. On her person, in addition to a few personal items and some cash wrapped in a scarf border, police found an unactivated SIM card and a bus ticket to Hermosillo. The papers matched. Fingerprints confirmed. The arrest warrant was reconfirmed within 3 hours thereafter. Marisol was escorted back to Tucson that very night. She sat behind the frosted glass in the interrogation room as if waiting for someone to pick her up. Her hair was neatly styled. Her white shirt had no wrinkles, her arms crossed in front of her chest, showing a suspicious proactivity. That appearance, calm, almost serene, made what she was about to say even more dangerous. Through the one-way mirror, Daniel stood as still as a statue. His cheeks twitched as he heard Marisol's voice through the speaker, soft, sharp, and full of mockery. "So, I'm being brought back here to play the villain." She chuckled softly, then tilted her head. "Has anyone written a script for this film? Or is Daniel planning to direct and star in it himself?" Ruiz didn't laugh. He was waiting. Marisol lightly pulled her sleeve down from her wrist, adjusting her sitting position. The light on the ceiling reflected off the shiny steel table. She still maintained her arrogant gaze as if attending a boring date, not being arrested on 3 federal charges. Ruiz opened the file in front of him, each sheet of paper turned with the tip of his finger. He wasn't in a hurry. Then he said, not raising his voice, but each word falling like a stone, "You're very confident, because you know someone in the industry used to help you delay the arrest warrant." "I know." Marisol tilted her head, raising her eyebrows slightly. Ruiz continued without blinking. "But now you're sitting here. You're no longer in Durango, no longer in the network you used to control, and I'll say it bluntly, once you've stepped into federal jurisdiction, no outside force can sneak in to save you." He gently pushed the file towards her. "You will pay the price. For every missing child. For every lie you've built." Marisol laughed softly, not sarcastically, not hastily, but as if enjoying a private entertainment. Then she leaned back in her chair, crossed her arms, her eyes sweeping over Ruiz's face as if measuring him. "Well then," she said slowly, "let's wait and see." The room returned to silence. But this time, no one laughed anymore. On the table, the newly reopened file. But Marisol's name wasn't on the list of witnesses or victims. It appeared under the section for suspected repeat offenders, with a bright red note. Related to allegations of kidnapping of minors, Sinaloa, 1992. Case closed due to lack of evidence. The day before, while reviewing old materials with Ruiz at the Interpol liaison office, Daniel happened to pick up an old wedding photo Marisol and Carlos standing next to each other in front of a spray-painted wall in Hermosillo. Nothing special except for a faint detail on the right side of the frame. A graffiti text that was half covered, but Daniel recognized it because he had seen it in a crime scene photo from another disappearance case 10 years ago. "The world of children doesn't disappear on its own," Daniel said softly. "It's cut away piece by piece by someone." Emilia was brought to the lineup, not coerced, no prompting. She looked at Marisol, not afraid, not crying, just raised her hand, pointed directly at the woman and said, "Aunt tied me up with a big rope, then said, 'It'll only be a short sleep.'" The statement fell into the room like a stone thrown into a calm lake, slowly but unstoppable. Marisol didn't react. She just looked through the one-way mirror as if she knew who was standing behind it, smiled faintly, the smile of someone who still believed they hadn't been defeated. A search warrant for Marisol's old house in Durango was issued that night. The lockpicking team found some old items stuffed under the floorboards, including an old computer and a few leather-bound notebooks with torn corners. In the hard drive, shortened emails were sent to encrypted addresses. The content was simple quantity, age, easy to manage condition. Another line repeated, "No talking, no reacting, take straight to the border." In the notebooks, handwritten names, a few crossed out. A list of children with notes like, "Deep sleeper cries, little clings to mum, reacts strongly to men." At police headquarters, Ruiz traced a series of shady transfers to a secondary account in Hermosillo, Mexico. The recipient was an internationally wanted person linked to 2 cases of illegal human trafficking. The most recent transfer was 4 months ago with the content "E-delivery complete, awaiting confirmation for M." E, none other than Emilia. When notified of the official arrest warrant, Marisol only tilted her head slightly. She didn't scream, didn't beg. Before being led away, she turned to Ruiz, asking, "Do you think I use a gun or kill someone with my bare hands?" He didn't respond. Marisol smiled. "I didn't kill Beatrice. I just opened the way for her. She lived in this world long enough." Daniel stood in the monitoring room through the one-way mirror. For a moment, he couldn't hear anything, only saw Marisol's face, indifferent, as if the months of imprisoning his daughter were just a drawn-out game. He pushed the door open before Ruiz could react. Marisol saw him walk in, not at all surprised. "Well, the rhetorician is here," she said, her voice as smooth as flowing water. Daniel didn't sit down. He stood right at the edge of the table, his whole body leaning forward. His eyes were bloodshot, his voice low but clear. "You tied up my daughter like an animal. You coaxed her with sweet words to trick her into being silent. Then you stood by and watched when she cried for her mother, the person you just killed. And yet you sit here, put your feet up, laugh as if it's all just a cheap script." Marisol was silent, just tilting her head slightly. Daniel slammed his hand hard on the table. The resounding sound shook the whole room. "I lost a year to unravel every piece of deceit that you and that sicko built. I dug up every file, knocked on every door. I buried my wife without knowing who killed her. I watched my daughter wake up trembling when she heard the sound of an iron door. You think I don't want to kill you right now?" His voice broke. His hands clenched, trembling as if wanting to rush to strangle the person in front of him. But then he took a step back, took a deep breath, said, clearly emphasizing each word, "But I won't do that. I will let you be judged exactly as the law provides for people like you, not because I believe in justice, but because I want you to live long enough to be afraid." Marisol only smiled faintly, but this time in her eyes there was a very thin flash for the first time, unclear whether it was contempt or beginning to understand that she would have no more games to play. In the heavily guarded hospital room in Hermosillo, Carlos opened his eyes after more than 6 months of hovering between consciousness and unconsciousness. The ceiling was speckled with cold white lights. 4 tubes stuck all over both hands, his mouth dry like ash. But the first thing he whispered wasn't Marisol's name or "Where am I?" but "The girl. Did she say anything?" The doctor glanced quickly at the police on duty. No one answered, but that information was recorded, sent straight to Agent Ruiz's desk. Daniel was notified while reviewing an old recording, the one he had secretly made by Carlos's bed. That clip now became the evidence opening the way for a search warrant for his old phone, a scratched Nokia, seemingly useless, seized from the scene. At the FBI's Digital Technology Department, a female specialist with neatly styled grey hair quietly restored the deleted messages, names of bus stations, lists of goods, repeating travel schedules between 3 cities. And then a recording not in the main memory recovered from the system chip. Carlos's voice, hoarse and murky. "Pushed. Beatrice slipped like a falling rock. No resistance. Do exactly like her." A silence then. "Should have finished sooner. The girl keeps opening her eyes every time I think she's asleep." For the first 10 days after Carlos woke up, the FBI sent 3 rounds of investigators. Each person used their own tactics, from gently asking questions to indirectly pressuring with evidence, even putting photos of Beatrice and Emilia on the table. But he didn't say, not a word. Only looked absent-mindedly through the hospital room window or closed his eyes, pretending to sleep. Ruiz gnashed his teeth in the meetings.
"It's not that he doesn't remember," he told the investigation team, "but he's holed up in his head like a snake crawling into a rock crevice." There was no other way. The FBI had to switch to the final strategy, hiring a psychologist who had worked in prisoner crises in wartime. She didn't bring questionnaires or files. On the first day, she sat down next to Carlos, not putting pen to paper, not turning on the recording device. She just told stories. A story about a boy who got lost in the forest for 3 nights because he was chasing a squirrel. Another about a mother holding her child under a layer of rubble in a mine collapse. The mother's last breath was to keep her child's hand from shaking. Carlos didn't respond, but his chest heaved. His eyes were no longer as lifeless as in previous days. The third story she told slower, about a man who had left his family to find something better. And when he returned, there was only an empty house. Carlos glanced at her, briefly, but enough for her to know a blood vessel in his memory had just twitched. And she stopped. Not forcing, not cornering. Just let the story hang in the air, then stood up, nodded slightly. "See you tomorrow, if you still remember your name." The next day, Carlos opened his mouth for the first time, not to confess, but to whisper, "Where's Marisol?" And from there, the door began to crack open. Meanwhile, the witness from Arizona, the former ticket seller at the Greyhound station, confirmed a man wearing a baseball cap, looking like Carlos had come to buy a ticket, using fake documents in the name of Uncle. He remembered because the girl didn't leave the water bottle out of her hand, and her eyes didn't blink once, as if afraid she'd be put on the wrong trip. Finally,
the FBI officially indicted Carlos on 3 counts first-degree murder kidnapping of a minor and illegal human trafficking across international borders.
Carlos was transferred to a special medical prison room where no one was allowed to come near except federal control personnel. The trial of Marisol and Carlos took place shortly thereafter, with drama and struggles from both sides. On the 6th day of the trial, Emilia was called to testify. She walked slowly through the aisle between the 2 rows of wooden seats, her shoes clicking on the tile floor. Her hair was neatly styled, her hand tightly clutching the pink water bottle that she carried like a talisman. When standing before the stand, Emilia didn't look at Carlos. She looked straight at Marisol. The judge allowed her to recount the events in the language of a child, not forcing the legal framework. "Aunt tied me up with a hard rope, covered my mouth with a jacket. She said, 'This will only be a short sleep.' Then she left with Uncle Carlos." Emilia's voice didn't shake, but her hands squeezed the handle of the bottle until it was white. "I looked through the crack in the door. I saw my mum arguing with them. I saw Uncle Carlos push my mum." Marisol turned away for the first time. The defense lawyer intended to object, but was rejected. "I was locked up for 2 days. No one came. No light. I wasn't allowed to call anyone. I thought my mum was still alive." Emilia took a deep breath. "But then I heard him say to her, 'She won't remember. She's still young.'" The whole room fell silent. Daniel stood up halfway, but then sat down, holding his head in his hands. The judge nodded his thanks. But when the police intended to take Emilia out, she looked up. "I have one more thing." The judge motioned his agreement. Emilia turned to Marisol. For the first time throughout the trial, she stepped down from the stand, coming closer. She said softly, "I don't know why you did that. Maybe because you thought, if you took me, you would have something you've never had. But my mom is dead, and I can't carry anger all my life." Emilia stopped, then bowed her head. "I forgive you." Marisol didn't speak. Her lips were pressed tightly together, but her body was trembling as if just broken from the inside. She slumped into the chair, not falling, but melting piece by piece from the shell that had held her for the past year. The verdict was delivered the following afternoon. Carlos and Marisol, convicted of first-degree murder kidnapping of a minor conspiring to traffic people illegally, received life sentences without parole. Marisol didn't resist. She just nodded. As for Carlos, cold as pebbles, showed nothing beyond a sarcastic glance. A week later, the conclusions from the internal investigation were published. The local police officer, who had tried to delay Marisol's arrest and had handled Claudia Navarro's case 8 years ago, was permanently dismissed for covering up and gross negligence. No one came to see him off. As for Daniel that day, he just came to pick up Emilia from school earlier than usual. The two walked through the tree-lined street. In Emilia's hand was the old pink water bottle. In Daniel's hand, only the small hand that was squeezing his finger. Under the late spring sunset, the Sierra Madre mountains were dyed a burnt copper color, not much different from a year ago. But for Emilia, this place was no longer the darkness that covered her sleep, but the space that needed to be filled with truth, with memories, with love. The two stood by the edge of the Lago Encantado trail, which was the last place Beatriz had been alive. Now there was a clear warning sign. Dangerous area, no traffic after sunset. At the foot of the sign, a few dried flowers that someone had planted long ago. Daniel looked at his daughter. "Are you okay now?" he asked. Emilia nodded, not looking at him. She was writing something on the damp sand by the stream with a branch. "Mom, I escaped." The writing was crooked, inexperienced, but certain. Then the wind blew through, gradually erasing each stroke, as if her mother had finished reading it. They camped nearby in the exact spot where Emilia had been tied to a tree a year ago. Now, instead of panicking in the darkness, she lay beside her father, hand in hand, watching the constellations. "My mom always pointed out Ursa Major to me," Emilia said, her voice as light as the wind. Daniel smiled, then pointed to the sky. "There's sea right above us." For the first time since Emilia had returned, she laughed out loud for no reason, just because the sky was still there and the two of them were still sitting next to each other. In the morning, they built a small stone plaque next to the trail, not too big, not too loud, just enough for anyone who stopped to read the engraved words, "Beatriz Castillo, a mother who fought to the end." Daniel put his hand on the plaque, as if placing his hand on a heart that had rested. Emilia was silent for a long time, then asked her father, "Why didn't you give up?" He looked down at her, his eyes as if retreating to the long, miserable days in the creel room, then the sleepless nights, searching for his name in the cries of lost children. "Because I knew." "Somewhere you were calling my name," he said. A simple sentence, but enough for Emilia to hug him from the side without tears. That afternoon, they left the mountains. The car slid lightly along the dirt road, the wheels grinding on the thin layer of dust, like footprints closing a journey. Daniel was driving when his phone rang. He looked at the screen, unknown number, no name. "Hello," he answered. A woman's voice rang out urgently, panting, as if someone had just run very fast to find hope. "I heard about your organization, about children being found again," she said. "I think I saw my daughter in Mexicali." Daniel didn't answer immediately. He looked through the rearview mirror where Emilia was sleeping peacefully, hugging her pink water bottle. But his eyes were as bright as the day he stood watching the dust of the trail disappear behind him. "Did you tell well?" he asked. "I only told the truth," Emilia replied, taking his hand. That evening, the office of El Camino del Padre had visitors. A woman walked in, thin, her eyes shadowed from many days of sleep deprivation. In her hand she held a photo, a little girl about 6 years old, curly hair, holding a water bottle. Blue. Am I in the right place?" she asked. Daniel stood up. Emilia was sitting drawing in the corner of the room, turning her head to look at her father. She whispered almost inaudibly, but he heard clearly. This time, it's Dad's turn to help them. The sign outside the headquarters still read the old words, El Camino del Padre, the Father's footprints. And in Daniel's heart, he knew sometimes it doesn't need to find all the children, just need to help one father, one mother not give up. Because with a father, no footprint is too far to go to find his child. You've probably heard about disappearances, then quickly scrolled past, because no one is familiar, because it's unclear if it's true or false. But if you've read to this line, maybe you understand there are stories that don't allow us to turn our backs. The story of Daniel and Emilia is not only a journey to find a child, but a reminder that sometimes it is a father's love that illuminates the path that justice has forgotten. In the darkness of trauma, there are small lights, like the pink water bottle, leading the way back to family. The story you just read was inspired by many real cases that have occurred over more than a decade. The names of characters and locations have been changed to protect the identity of the victims, but the pain, perseverance, and truth are all kept intact. We retell it not to scare readers, but to remind each other that there are things that cannot be ignored, voices that cannot be suppressed, And children, no matter how small, all deserve to be found again. If this story makes you silent, let it speak for you. Please share it via WhatsApp to a friend, a father, a mother, or anyone who needs to be reminded that in this world there are still people who don't give up. Because with a father like Daniel, no footprint is too far to go to find his child. Send this story out. Someone somewhere might be waiting to hear it right when they need it most.